This morning's reading is entitled "Everything Falls Away." I guess it's kind of like a poem, but it's not, by Parker J. Palmer, and it's based on a poem by William Stafford. And that phrase from Stafford's poem that caught Palmer's eye is, "There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change." Sooner or later, everything falls away. You, the work you've done, your successes, large and small, your failures too. Those moments when you were light alongside the times you became one with the night. The friends, the people you loved, who loved you, those who might have wished you ill. None of this is forever. All of it is soon to go, or going, or long gone. Everything falls away, except the thread you followed, unknowing all along. The thread that strings together all you've been and done. The thread you didn't know you were tracking until toward the end, you see that the thread is what stays as everything falls away. Follow that thread as far as you can, and you'll find that it does not end, but weaves into the unimaginable vastness of life. Your life was never the solo turn it seemed to be. It was always part of the great weave of nature and humanity, an immensity we come to know only as we follow our own small threads to the place where they merge with the boundless whole. Each of our threads runs its course, then joins in life together. This magnificent tapestry, this masterpiece in which we live forever. Let us hold silence for a few moments. Blessed be. Over the nearly 20 years that I've been preaching, I've created many sermons about our seventh principle, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And while it's always felt good and safe and very kumbaya to know that I am a part of something bigger than myself, I continue to find it difficult to fathom the awesome immensity of all existence. But this morning's reading brought that huge construct down to earth for me with its simple concept of a continuous thread that we follow throughout our lives. And I began to see new ways of envisioning the web and my connection within it. So, what is that metaphorical thread we follow that leads us forward and ultimately connects us to all existence, even as everything else falls away? People far smarter than I have described the thread as truth, love, beauty, a deity, our humanity, our authentic self, hope, or curiosity. All of those options resonate with me in some way, so I couldn't help but wonder if my thread might be an interweaving of some or all of them. Seeing it from another point of view, if I thought of those options as colors, might my thread be something like variegated yarn with different colors appearing to lead me forward as they were needed during different stages of my life, because people change their objectives quite often as they move through life. Whatever the thread is, it would need to be something that would last, that would be reliable and trustworthy throughout the falling away of everything. But how does the thread work? Could it be like the rope farmers used to use in blizzards? They tied it to the back of the house and the door of the barn so they could follow the rope out to care for their animals and still get safely back to the house in zero visibility conditions. That's a down-to-earth, easily understandable example of how the thread might work as a through line for our life that carries us from birth at one end to death at the other. But unless you live in a sensory deprivation tank, your life simply does not follow a clear, straight path from birth to death. There are always unexpected things that make us veer from our course, from glitches to changes of mind to boulder-sized problems dropped in our way, seemingly from out of the blue. And it's particularly within those moments that our thread will either touch or become entangled or interconnected in some way with the threads or webs of others. For a few moments, I want to visit the interconnected web using a different point of view than the one we usually take. So instead of thinking in terms of the awesome immensity of all existence represented by the web, I'd like for us to descend from the cosmos and take a look at the web through a microscope instead of a telescope. Within the interdependent web of all existence lie a gazillion threads forming little webs, beginning with the intrapersonal or internal web of our own existence. This web that is us connects all of our thoughts and actions to our body and soul. In other words, it connects our mind with our muscle, our physicality with our intellectuality. It's the amazing spider, seen by many people as a pest to be stepped on, can spin a web of silk that is 5 times stronger on a weight to strength basis than steel. Yet despite our human size and feelings of superiority, none of us have webs that are intact. They are instead raveled and frayed in some places, and bow-tied and knotted together in others. It's not necessarily a negative thing that they're like that, because it's the very imperfection of our intrapersonal webs that makes us, each one, the unique individual we are. Yet as delightful as that may be in some cases, these same imperfections often serve to get us into trouble as we connect with other webs. The most immediate web that comes to mind is that of the family. I don't think there's any such thing as a totally functional family. I believe that the dysfunctional exists because of the imperfections of each family member's personal web that simply don't want to knit together from time to time. As we adjust the microscope a little, we can see that within a family, each member's individual web is attached to those of immediate and extended family members and friends, each of whom extend their own ragged webs, interconnecting with fringes and insinuating their threads into tiny tears and gaping ruptures of ours. All of these secondary and tertiary webs weaving into our own act on us, changing us for good or ill as we stretch ourselves to follow our own thread further into the world. Children go to school and connect their webs to those of schoolmates and teachers. They come home connected to new threads of questionable ideas that just don't fit into the tight webs of their family's particular values. We get a job and intertwine our webs with those of our co-workers and bosses whose more rigid threads may truly irk our partners, often stretching our webs between work and home to the breaking point. We join clubs or interest groups and weave our threads together with those of like-minded individuals, and suddenly find that perhaps the weave of an old friend's web doesn't quite match ours anymore because she's not a part of our book club. And we watch that friend's web fall away, just like other webs will fall away over time as we continue to follow our thread through the through line of our lives. All of the people and groups with which we interact become a part of our personal web, and our web becomes a part of theirs, entangled in the thoughts, lives, and activities of ever-widening webs. With these rather convoluted thoughts in mind, the idea of a simple thread began to open things up for me, because even though it's late in my life, I realized that knowing now what I know, thanks to this morning's reading, I was given an opportunity to track my metaphorical thread and try to understand it before the time comes for everything else to fall away. At this point, I insert a mea culpa moment, because I often present ideas to you for consideration without really studying how they affect me personally. And I find them very interesting as I ponder them while I'm writing, but because I have to move on to other topics, I often leave them hanging like loose threads. But this one, the idea of the thread, has captured my heart and my imagination so much that I want to share my own experience of it with you. So with this newfound knowledge of what was in store for me, if I could identify and follow my thread, I found myself eager to return to my list of metaphors for the thread. And I discovered that my initial idea of weaving them all together was a way of avoiding a choice. Because while the goal of the thread we follow might change over time, we really can't pursue them all together. The variegated yarn idea works a little better to describe changes in our goals because, of course, they can change. But in my case, there's been one very specific thread I've been following my entire life. It ties in with two very famous quotes of Socrates: "Know thyself," and "the unexamined life is not worth living." The key to knowing thyself is to acknowledge and make peace with our constantly changing values, recognizing that we are not the same person we were yesterday, and we will forever continue to change in some way or other as our thread interweaves with those of others. I want to acknowledge that it's certainly possible to live a fulfilled and happy life without giving thyself a second thought. That was me for many years. But I've come to believe that any life can be enriched by self-study. Once I reached my 60s, shortly after I moved to Vermont, I began to dig into who I really was and what had motivated me to do the things I've done, say the things I've said, think the thoughts I've thunk. Just wondering if you're listening. In other words, I wanted to understand how things that have affected my life and my response to them have transformed me into the ever-evolving person I continue to become. And through sharing a bit of my story, I hope to open you to thinking about and naming the thread that's accompanied you throughout your journey. In looking back, I can now see with great clarity that my thread, ever since I was about 9, has been the search for my authentic self. My early search was spotty at best because I didn't understand what I was trying to do. What I did know was that there was something lacking in me, something I eventually came to understand as a need to fill a hole in my heart that had been caused by being given up for adoption at birth by my mother. Adopted children, particularly those of us in closed adoptions, are tasked with filling in a lot of blanks as far as who we are is concerned. We don't look like members of our adoptive family. We don't have mannerisms that we share with siblings or parents. Many of us don't have any facts about our personal situation. And I have absolutely no doubts on one level or another, all of us long for connection with our biological roots. I've been looking for my authentic self for about 65 years. That's one heck of a long thread. Early yesterday morning, I was awakened from a dead sleep by the thought that I have never been alone in my search. I've been accompanied by a child whose birth mother named her Barbara Ann. This child has been following a different thread, and that's the thread of hope. Hope that one day she'd finally feel that she fit in somewhere, a place she could open her too well-guarded heart. I read somewhere that all things considered, people my age have probably lived 85% of their lives. That's a sobering thought. And now that I am beginning the last 15%, God willing, I feel that Barbara Ann and I are finally finding our way toward melding into the real me through the connections I've made with a cousin and my two half-sisters and my extended maternal family. And messaging with my cousin on Friday night, I mentioned that I'm feeling better and better as I get to know more about who I am and where I came from. And I described to her the hole in my heart that might have been filled, I thought, by knowing my mother and being a part of her family and all of that family's shared experiences. Part of her reply was very insightful. I really think growing up in Charleston and the experiences you had, as best I can tell, certainly outweigh growing up in Georgetown and in the strictest of Baptist religions. Can you even imagine that? It's a given that the choices we make, or those that are made for us, deny us the chance to experience what might have been had our choices been different. Do you ever find yourself wondering what might have happened in your life if? I know I'm guilty of that. In her book, Tiny Beautiful Things, Cheryl Strayed puts that longing into perspective. She writes, I never know, and neither will you, of the life you don't choose. We'll only know that whatever the sister life was, it was important and beautiful and not ours. It was the ghost ship that didn't carry us. There's nothing to do but salute it from the shore. In her book, The Threads That Bind, author Danny Williamson wrote, your life is always under construction. It's your job to learn how to untangle the threads and weave a tapestry that matches your desires. Now, that's a lovely sentiment. And while I do believe that our lives are always under construction, I don't believe that we should think in terms of untangling any threads, because those tangles have gone a long way toward forming us as unique individuals. Without tangles, there'd be no web. And without the web, we might be floating about in space, tethered by a thread that knows no connection. So let's not think in terms of stopping to fix things. Let's think in terms of weaving our thread around and through those tangles, which have contributed so much to who we're becoming as we journey on toward what Parker Palmer calls this magnificent tapestry, this masterpiece in which we will live forever. May it come to be so for Barbara Ann, for me, and for each of you. Amen.